Hey there everybody, I thought you might appreciate a belated update as to what happened in our last Resurrection campaign, a fragile alliance. This centred around an alliance between the dwarves and the high elves who had come to help them to reclaim some lost grounds and crucially deal with the problem in Karak Gantuk. So, without further ado, I shall take you over to the map and show you how things progressed. You can see that I'm outside. I have put the map behind me up against my fruit trees, but being the height of summer, there's a lot of bees around, so you'll have to forgive some buzzing. Here we go. So we shall begin in the north, crucially Blackfire Pass. Ours is an area of contention, traditionally held by dwarves and the Empire, but to give you an idea of scale, this map is several hundred miles long, so this is not no small pass. It's many leagues long. Lots and lots of goblins and orcs around, of course, in the mountains, and more besides. We have Sylvania further north, so wandering vampires all over the place. And I mean, you can see these vast forests, which even before these current times of strife, are full of goblin strongholds, beasts galore, wandering mercenaries who have no fixed allegiance. But the campaign last time began with the Empire trying to push through Blackfire Pass to ensure it's clear, presumably for reinforcements. Elsewhere we had the Dogs of War and allies of the Empire trying to secure various points. Chaos had regathered last time, further to the east here. Whoops. Chaos had regathered further to the east, and we're going to make a big push. For those of you who are not up to speed on this campaign, it centres at the moment, it began much further south, but is now centres around Karak Gantuk. Not completely, but it does focus everybody. Karak Gantuk, as the name would suggest, is a long time chaos hold, not one of their main holds, but important nonetheless. But several seasons ago, this was taken over by Chaos Dwarfs. Crucially, it was Gargath of Baal before reinforcements joined him, and he's been thoroughly comfortably sat in there ever since. It's not a huge force, but such is the position of this fortress, it's, well, perhaps not easily defensible, but certainly not easily overcome. Okay, so we have the Chaos Dwarves in here, Chaos pushing from here, Orcs all over the bloody place. We've had some Empire reinforcements come along. They've had allies in the shape of various Dogs of War forces and some Bretonnians, of course. But equally, the forces of Chaos have had a Cult of Slaanesh force of all things. We've had some Dark Elves coming up the Black Gulf. The High Elves are already here, having come previously. And they were down, let's just check, you can see that part of the map here. They were down in Barak Var, which is all the way down here. Not a lot of action going on here. There was over the campaign, but as I said, it's focused further north. The Chaos had a huge push to the west to secure some land around here, obviously with the hope of reinforcing this area. But the Orcs had other ideas and basically scuppered things. Anyhow, the campaign was, as might be expected, back and forth, but this is how it finished. So, in the north we had a huge fight here between dwarves, obviously a fine alliance, and then an unusual alliance here. We had the vampires of Viscount Wilhelm von Drac, who had in his thrall an Empire force of Minhak Rao. So an unusual alliance, but the dwarves took them on, not strictly for Blackfire Pass, but to support the surrounding areas, and this was a win for the forces of good. So the Empire Dwarf, the forces of good then, have really secured this area. Further along here, we have the night goblins of the shaman, great shaman Wizgub, coming out of the forests to try and take, if not the town of Arkendorf, certainly the surrounding areas, and yet another important route here. While the forces of chaos haven't really been pushing at this side, it's important to secure it. Anyhow, we have a mercenary force, Dogs of War, Alexander the Lion Slayer Bane, who held them at bay. He didn't beat them, but it ended up a draw. But that was sufficient to claim that Arkendorf on that road has not been taken by the night goblins. But needless to say, it's under continual threat. So if we work our way down a little more, let's just change the camera a little bit. Here we go. We have an alliance between Empire and Wood Elves this time. That's Timothy de Wolfbane representing the Empire, and then Aidan Sunspirit of the Wood Elves, who has been in these forests from day one. They took on a joint chaos force of Baer Gorfist and Karnak the Foul Usurper, or the Black Wolf of the Northlands, to give him his full name. So they were attempting again an important river route and road north of Stiratia. And that was a huge and long battle, but ultimately it was a win for the forces of good. So it's another pathway and a crucial waterway that's been held. So if we work our way a little further over again, can we see? Yes. So in the shadows of the Black Mountains, and certainly perhaps not in view of Karagantic, but not too far away, on these roads leading up to it and on the fringes of the forest, we had a large force of Chaos Dwarfs sent out from Karagantic to take on an equally large Lizardmen army that had been skirting along the swamps here on the river Starneck. And what their purpose was, they certainly did not have the means to lay siege to the fortress, but they were clearly trying to get closer. Who knows why? Anyhow, the Chaos Dwarves, resilient as ever, and this ended up as a win for the evil forces. Okay, so next we have, let's just change the angle slightly again. We have a fight north of Vidvodan, and yet again all the fighting, or most of the fighting, is taking place on these crucial roadways and riverways. Obviously there's tracks and paths everywhere, but these are big and well established. So there's another alliance between the Empire, this time Friedrich the Foxlord of Vergessenwald and Bronskagsen. It's not, the fight is not in the woods, it's just north of Vidvodan, and they were fighting against the Chaos Nurgle force of Anthraxus the Plague Hulk, and an unusual ally in the form of an Oblahord of Great Lord King Bizarre. And you may be surprised to hear that this was yet another win, a minor win, but a win nonetheless. So the forces of good have held this, but needless to say, these evil forces, or the Noblas, I'm guessing they're not too dissimilar to Dogs of War, and they will fight for whoever serves them best. So this time they're on the losing side, and Vidvodan has been held. Okay, so we'll continue with this fight. This is north of the Black Mountains. South of the Black Mountains, and out of the Farge Forest we have some night goblins coming of Grupal Kabumist, whose name suggests exactly what you might imagine. A lunatic night goblin with a propensity to play about the things he ought not to. Anyhow, he came across the Lord Domancil, a vampire count's force, who had an exceptional campaign season, never having been beaten. And unfortunately for the goblins, they didn't change things. So I can't imagine for a second that Grupal intended to take on a vampire force and the vampire force would certainly not have been looking for a fight south of the mountains. What it was doing there, I couldn't tell you, but regardless, the fight ended up, I've just put win for good. The vampires are representing good in this case, so the night goblins will have retreated into the woods. So down here we have another fight between Giant Beast of Chaos force of Stone Pelter and Gorkar Pox Tower against the High Elf force of Finer the Emerald Flame and Lord Athram Storm Rider. You can see the beasts have just come out of the forest. The High Elves had been patrolling these areas here, another important route between Moslak and, sorry I've forgotten what this place is called, Berkersburg. And the force of High Elves who have been performing very well and certainly holding up their end of the alliance, and it ended up a win for good. Where are we? Okay, we're heading east briefly and over to this fight here. I'm repeating myself, but it's important. The main passageway from Moslak to Broska saw savage orcs and a normal orcs and goblins force of Ratchet, Rakat and Grimzog Ripper facing the Bretonians of Siguriam and the dwarves of Lord Thimber Davinston. And once again, if you haven't guessed already, it was not much of a win, but a win nonetheless. So this path too is in the hands of the forces of good. Which brings us to our last two battles. This battle here is one of the few that didn't take place on any particular thoroughfare or waterway, and saw joint foes of Dark Elves and Chaos Slaanesh, namely Furion the Impaler and Lucaritza Soulriven. So they're fighting just north of Black Crags versus a mercenary force of dear old Prince Luigi Pidere and the High Elf force of Prince Indirion. And this fight ended up as a very hard fought draw, as I recall. And then the very last fight of the weekend saw some dwarves venture north of Barakvar, bearing in mind this is a city garrison, so it has several armies at his disposal. And they were heading north from Tomjek the Brasov when they came upon the savage orcs of Ozog the Orbiskad. And Lord Bongby Grimson's army took him on, but there was no resounding victory this time for the forces of good. It was a draw, but the roadway is held, but I mean it's tenuous at best. So that's how things ended up. We have numerous reports from the field. Not all of them will be accurate, of course, but this is what we do know. So let me just check I've got everything in view. I believe I have. We do know that the Dark Elves of Furion, after having taken some heavy losses last time, have disappeared. Whether they have sailed back, who knows. But we do know the forces of Slaanesh have headed east. How far east, I could not tell you. Then we have the dwarves. They were on the road, so they're going to be around there somewhere. The orcs are never far away, but surprisingly, we also know that the forces, the dogs of war of Prince Luigi, have headed back to Estalia, if that's where they came from. And most surprisingly, we do know that the High Elves have headed south. Here we have more High Elves who have also headed south. We don't know if they are actually in this port, but they're certainly no longer in the field. So that's 3 armies have left. The beasts of Nurgle are still in the woods somewhere. We don't know exactly where, of course. Let's have a look. Where else we go? We do know we are having some Empire reinforcements. We are not sure who is leading them. but there are two Empire forces heading this way. The vampire counts have, as far as we know, just blended in, or gone back to Sylvania. Regardless, they are no longer there. The Empire force of Min Hao Rao has disappeared, no longer under the thrall of the Viscount Wilhelm von Drac. Night goblins have disappeared into the woods. Alexander Bain, last report was he was still garrisoning in Ackendorf. The two dwarf armies here, one has gone back to Kazad Hasdrakadrin, and the other was near Munzig. The wood elves, surprise, surprise, have disappeared into the woods. Last report, and the high elves also garrisoned in Munzig. Working their way across, and surprisingly, the Chaos Dwarves are still quite content in or around Karakantak. The Nobler Horde, which the map did not show, but they were set upon by some lizards at the end of last time. But they are still claiming a kingdom to the east of Vidovan. And the forces of Nurgle are here or hereabouts. The the vampire counts of Domicil, Lord Domicil, have disappeared. The night goblins have gone back into the wood. The Empire force is still near Vidovdan, as are their dwarven allies. Night goblins back in the woods. These guys are in on the fringes of the wood. The Bretonnians of Sir Guillaume have left the field, although reliable reports show there is another Bretonnian army heading east. And finally, Lord Fimberdalenston is garrisoned in Moslak. The Savage Orcs are just in the field. One has headed north, we understand, and the other has headed south. These are not close together for any particular reason, but that's what our last report was. And finally, we have a report of a huge Chaos army of Vikan the Nightmare somewhere in the east. Last seen crossing Skull River, so where they are now, I could not tell you. So bear in mind, these are not guaranteed reports, and some of the last sightings were many months ago, so a lot could have changed, but it does give you an idea how things are set up for Resurrection 6. All being well, there should be around 30 of us, so more than enough to have an enjoyable weekend. So I look forward to seeing you all then.